Hey, what's going on, guys? Today I'm going to be installing a 3-inch lift kit on my Toyota FJ Cruiser in preparation for the Mickey Thompson 305s that I have coming in the mail. Hey guys, so this is the installation video on a 2007 to 2014 FJ Cruiser. I'm installing that. I have a rough country 3-inch, it's a 3-inch front and a 2-inch rear lift kit, and I also have the Total Chaos upper control arms for the front to replace the stock upper control arms. And I've got all the parts laid out here in the back along with tools and everything. This is the spacers for the front suspension, upper control arms for the front suspension, and then I have the parts for the rear suspension sitting there along with all of my tools. Now before I start talking about what tools I'm going to be using, I should mention that in the top right of this video I'm going to have words that are saying what section of the video that I'm currently in, whether I'm talking about tools and things like that I have laid out here, whether I am installing the upper control arms, whether I am working on the rear suspension, removing that and reinstalling that, or installing the new stuff I should say, or whether I'm removing the front suspension. Whatever I'm working on, I will have that listed in the top right of this video, and I will also have the corresponding times for that section of the video laid out in the description of the video below. So check that out if you want to jump to a specific section, if you want to go over what tools you'll need first, if you want to go back over and over what tools you'll need, whatever the case. You can also check out some of the off-roading videos that I have down in the description below. I will have I guess you could say a review video of me taking this off-road after my suspension is on, with the upper control arms, the rear suspension, the front suspension, all of that stuff. So if you want to compare that to the review video that I have, not review video, but if you want to compare that to the video that I have currently uploaded off-roading here in Hawaii on North Shore at a nice little off-roading spot called Kaena Point, K-A-E-N-A Point. I have that down in the description, and I probably have a video popping up that you can click on as well. So jumping into the tools, what tools I have laid out here. As far as tools, I have everything laid out that I'm going to use, and a lot of other tools. I'm going to go through all the tools that I have laid out here. The stuff that other stuff that I have that's not a tool. I have silicone grease lubricating compound, Napa brand. So it's any silicone stuff will work. You can use some of the high performance stuff. I think Formula 5 stuff is what a lot of guys recommend for more performance, whatever. But silicone lubricant is what you should use if you have polyurethane bushings. These are poly bushings. If you have rubber, then you can use a petroleum-based one, but do not use a petroleum-based one on the poly bushings. And I'm going to go through just the assembly of all this first. But just run through all the tools really quick. I've got my little pile of just different pliers here. But the main things that you're probably going to use, you're probably going to need some needle nose. I've got my vice grip pliers there, and then just some larger pliers. You might have to do a little bit of metal bending. That's possible. Ratchet extensions, little swivel, universal swivel. I've got different size ratchet extensions. But the main things that you are going to need, you're going to need a 10 millimeter, 14 millimeter or 9/16, 17 millimeter or 11/16, 19 millimeter or 3/4, and 21 millimeter or 13/16. You can get all of those tools if you want that I just mentioned, the metric and the standard. For your factory Toyota bolts and nuts and bolts and everything, you are going to want to use the metric sizes. And for the aftermarket parts, in my instructions that came with this, it actually had the standard sizes that I was mentioning along with the metric sizes, like the 21 and the 13/16 and 22 and the 7/8. So make sure you use the right size tools for the right size bolts. If it feels a little sloppy when you put it on, try to get the right size and use that. I also have deep sockets and shallow sockets of the 10 millimeter, 14 millimeter, 16, 17, 19, 21, and 22. And I have my fat hammer here. Breaker bar way over here, along with my socket extensions for removing the lug nuts off of the wheels. And then down underneath the vehicle I have my SUV jack that actually lifts up higher than a normal jack. What you don't want to use is one of the normal small jacks. It's about a foot to a foot and a half long. I think mine is about 2 feet long. It's more for lifting up SUVs and trucks that have a higher lift than a normal vehicle. So I'm using that. I recommend that. Do not put a block on top of or underneath your, if you have a smaller jack. Get the right size jack, borrow a jack from a friend, but do not do that, and do not set the vehicle on cinder blocks. What I also have is I have 3 jack stands. The reason I have 3 is I can't find my 4th one. So I have 3 jack stands. The reason I'm using 3 or 4, if I would recommend using 4, when I'm working on the front end, I'm going to have the vehicle supported on 2 jacks, and I'm going to have the rear wheels down on the ground. But the front 2 wheels are going to be off, and the jack stands are going to be supporting the front end of the vehicle. The other jack stand I'm going to be using for different things, holding up the like underneath the like the A-frame, the lower control arm. If I have to support the wheel spindle, things like that, whatever I have to support. I also have, for supporting the wheel spindle, while I mentioned that, I almost forgot to mention, I have just a little container full of bungee straps, all kinds of different sizes. If you don't have bungee straps, use some kind of a wire, because you will want to as you loosen up different things, you are possibly going to put some stress on the brake lines, and what you don't want to do is put stress on the brake lines, because it could possibly end up tearing, weakening it, so that you would end up developing a leak down the road, and if you can't stop, that's a big problem. So again, I will stress the most important thing that I have there is the torque wrench. So I'm going to be using the torque wrench at the very end. I'm not using it to loosen anything, I'm using it to tighten stuff back. So what I have the breaker bar for is loosening some stuff. Alright, so now I'm starting the assembly process on the upper control arms, preparing that for installation. So it's pretty simple, it's pretty straightforward. This is how it comes. These are all the parts that it comes with in the box whenever it comes from Total Chaos. And then there should be 8 of these. So 4 go on the left side and 4 go on the right side. One of these is for the left side, one of these is for the right side. And the bolt that holds in each of these upper control arms is, you're just going to reuse the stock one. So this is pretty easy to slip these in. Just slides right in. Okay, so also I should mention, do not grease the outside of this bushing. You're only going to grease the inside. So I've got this together, and whenever you assemble this, these are going to go like this. So they're going to be laid out like that. I'm only greasing the inside that the sleeve fits into. And the reason for that is this bushing is actually supposed to stay in place. It's not supposed to shift. Okay, I should have mentioned, use something that you wouldn't mind getting a little grease on. I have these old floor mats laid out that I'm using. So use something that you don't mind getting a little grease on, lay a rag down. So alright, got all my excess grease wiped off. Now, these little Zerk fittings. Now this is a pipe thread, so it's a taper. So you don't have to bottom it out whenever you tighten this down, and I believe this is why they said to grab the 3/8. Let me double check that. Yes, it is. So on these Total Chaos upper control arms, you're gonna need the 3/8. Now, since it is a pipe thread, it will get tighter and tighter as you're tightening it down. Let me, if I can get this thing to start. This is kind of frustrating. And you don't have to tighten this thing like crazy. You just have to get it to where it's nice and snug. And where this is pointing in a direction, don't make this point this way towards the vehicle. Point it towards the front, towards like this way, something like that. Make it an easy direction that you can put the grease gun on. So as you can see, they're not bottomed out. They don't have to be bottomed out. Just get them nice and snug. They're not going to vibrate loose. It's a taper thread, so as you tighten it down more and more, it will get tighter and tighter. There's no reason to over tighten it. It's not load bearing. It's just as long as it's snug enough to hold itself in place. I have everything the way it's supposed to be. These are ready to go on. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Alright, now as I'm looking at this, I'm realizing that the top part of this ball joint uniball is a different diameter, like the inside diameter, than the bottom. So it's a different inside diameter. So I'm looking at the top right now, and the top is the inside diameter. Oh, by the way, I should mention, once you cut this, these two sections, the top section and the bottom section, come apart, and it's good to know the inside diameter of the bottom side compared to the top side. So the top side's got a smaller inside diameter, and the bottom side is a larger inside diameter. I think the instructions say one is a 3/4 inside diameter and the other one's 9/16. I believe that's what the instructions say. I just looked at them. I think that's, I don't know. But the way that this sits, this slides in the top. This washer stays on the top side of this. This spacer, the fat end of it goes in here, and the bottom end of it goes into the goes through the spindle, and this washer sits on the bottom side of the spindle. So that's the arrangement of this. I believe that's the arrangement of that. If it's not the arrangement of it, then I'll correct myself later. But that's what it looks like, and I believe that's what I remember when I just looked over the instructions. So there's no preparation for this. You might have your spacers, depending on what brand you have. You might have to pound these studs in. These came already installed from the Rough Country when I got the Rough Country brand. It's a 3-inch spacer. So, all right. Well, let's get to installing. I think I have about an hour left of daylight. So it ended up getting dark on me last night, but that was all right. I had to go and get taller jack stands anyway. My small jack stands wouldn't sit on the frame in the back of the FJ. But going over the height of this right now before I lift it, as you can see, I'm at 36 inches up to the rear wheel well. That's actually 35.5. It's right at 34. So the front sits about 1.5 inches lower. And I know my wheels are nice and muddy. But what I have is I should mention this. You can pay for the I think Gorilla makes it, Gorilla Tools, but they have the shallow lug nut socket. But I am using a spark plug socket by Craftsman. Reason is because it's actually made to fit in those better than a typical socket. So I have this, the snap-on, it's 19 or 21 millimeter. You can flip, it's a reversible, but it won't fit inside this little socket hole around the lug nuts. Okay, now I'm at the driver's side. Removing this cotter pin. It's the first thing I'm going to be doing. The cotter pin that goes through the tie rod end. Alright, I had to use my breaker bar to get that loose, but it's loose now. so I can switch back to my ratchet and get this off the rest of the way. Okay, that's off and out of the way. I had to turn off the camera and hit it a little bit harder just to show it a bit more love, but it popped right out. Alright, now I'm up here. I'm removing this 12mm for the brake line brackets, so I won't have any stress on the brake lines whenever the spindle is loose. I can slide it out. There we go. There's no need to remove this clip that the brake line goes through in that bracket. I'm just removing the that from the spindle itself. And then I almost didn't see this when I had some mud on the upper control arm, but there's a little 10mm bolt that goes through that holds this other bracket in up here. Okay, now I'm up at the upper ball joint in the upper control arm, and this just has one of the cotter pins that's the clip type, so it should just be able to pull it straight out. Okay, just so I can get to the that bolt on the upper part of the spindle, I had to loosen this. Okay, that's out and out of the way. I was just able to pull that out with my hand, so hopefully you don't have to tap anything to knock it out of the way. But now I can get my breaker bar on that. Okay, I got this loose. Wasn't that difficult once the breaker bar got it loose. And by the way, you can see how my 12-point socket kind of chewed this up a little bit. So when you use a 3/4 socket, you want to make sure that it's a 6-point. So I took a little risk there using the 12-point, thinking like, well, if I'm careful, but it still slipped anyway. So and as you can see, this was happening down with the tie rod end. So if you notice, as I'm moving this, the upper control arm ball joint is actually spinning in place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shut the camera off, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some pressure down on this, because that's a wedge fitting that goes down into this spindle. So if I can get this to sit down in the spindle a little bit farther, then this will add pressure to this so that I can spin that off, and I shouldn't have to use an air impact to do this. You want to make sure to secure this with a tie down, a bungee strap, some kind of a wire first before you loosen this all the way, because once you loosen this, it's going to spring up. And when it springs up, your spindle is going to fall forward, and you're going to need something to hold this, so there's tension not put on your brake lines. So it looks like I've got enough slack where it could fall forward, and no tension will be put on the brake lines, but I want to be safe. I don't know how far it's going to fall forward. I'm not even going to let it fall forward. So bungee strap, and then once this comes all the way off, this will spring up. Okay, so now I can loosen this bottom end. I believe this looks larger than 19mm. Now that is 19mm, so I can loosen that, and I can loosen the bolts on top, which look like they're 14mm. The washer, I'll keep those together since the washer goes with that bolt, and then I'm going to leave this in while I disconnect those top three, the 14mm up top. And then you have one final 14mm nut back here on the strut tower. I like this ratchet wrench because you can do stuff like this in really tight places where you can't get a regular socket. Okay, that's everything. Now this bolt that's still down here that's holding everything in, I just got to get that out. Okay, so I got this out. I actually had to loosen my sway bar here, not just the sway bar end links. So there's 2 bolts here. You only have to take out the back one completely. The way the bracket is, it just slides over that front bolt. So there's 2 bolts here, 2 bolts on the other side, and this comes out. But it was really in the way of getting this strut out, and I know it's going to be in the way whenever I'm putting the strut back in with the spacer on top. So I finally got it in. It took a while just because I had to push down the lower control arm so far just to get that bolt to slide through. Actually, just to get it in place, so that I could push it up a little bit more and get the bolt to slide through. So it's definitely doable if you're by yourself, but it's very hard if you want to have a friend do it. And up here, this was a pretty tight fit getting this in, the spacer, but it's all in. You can do it like this, you can lift it like this, and then go and get an alignment done, but you're going to put some stress on your bushings and things like that, just because your stock suspension isn't made to be stretched out like this. So ideally what you would want to do is you would want to change out your upper control arm like I'm doing. So I'm changing it out so that I have an upper control arm that's adjustable, so that I can line up the front end. I'm still going to go get an alignment done just because I want it to be 100%, but when I put that upper control arm in, it should bring this pretty close to driving straight. So definitely have a friend, grab a friend so that he could try to slide this bolt in and slide this the strut assembly in. And now I'm also removing this 12mm bolt so I can get to this. I believe that's in 19. Yeah. Okay, I've got both of those 12mm bolts out of the way, right? So that now I can get to the end of this. It looks like I do have to take these off, so I'm going to pop these out with my screwdriver, or by hand. I can actually pop them out by hand. Okay, so I'm just going to leave that there, kind of let it hang so that I don't lose it. Makes it a little bit easier access though. So this feels like there's enough room up there where I should be able to unbolt it and just slide it forward. Okay, now that I've got that loose, this one kind of spins off by hand. I'm gonna be reusing that nut right there. And this one, okay. Alright, and then coming up and around, you can see this harness section is in the way, and I can just feel, if I feel around the back side of it, I can feel that bolt that I'm trying to slide out. So I just got to loosen this 10mm here, and it's funny because I've got the FJ Cruiser jacked up so high that I really can't see that much of what I'm doing in the engine bay, but I should be able to get that out. Just got to loosen one 10mm bolt, it feels like, and then I should be able to slide that bolt this way. Alright, now I got both the upper control arms lined up, one on top of the other one. So as you can see that it's slightly offset. This one's slightly offset to the right. But I'm gonna go ahead and bolt this on. So I'm gonna put it in place, and then whenever I have the spindle underneath, then I'm gonna snap this zip tie. But for right now, I'm gonna leave that zip tie on, just because there's parts that are there that I don't want to come off. And to get this out, I actually had to loosen the battery so that I could slide it all the way up. But once that little harness piece was out, that wasn't in the way anymore. So I just had to loosen the battery and just lift it up some. It's still connected, so it's just lifting it up just about an inch so that bolt can slide through. Okay, so I've got it bolted in. I got my spindle lined up, and I've got my my sway bar link setting back in and the tie rod end setting back in. So it's all coming back together. This was pretty difficult. I wouldn't say it's a one-man job, but the front side for sure you do need some help with. And I had to grab my jack to put some pressure on the bottom of the lower control arm so that I could push it up and slide this in. So as I was saying, the order, you've got the bolts, you've got the smaller washer, and then you've got the spacer down here that goes into the uniball, and then another washer and another nut. And the nut and washer are below the spindle. I am going to leave this disconnected. I'm going to connect everything else back, and I'm going to leave the sway bar link disconnected, only because I have to do the passenger side, and then after I do the passenger side and I connect that back and that side is good, I'm going to come over and I'm going to put this side in. I'm only doing that because whenever I was removing the strut assembly, I had to remove the passenger side tie rod end. So I'm going to leave both tie rod ends disconnected while I do the rest of the lift on the front end. And if you finish putting everything back together and the only things that you're left with is this one little 10mm bolt, then if you changed out your upper control arm, that's all that is. There's a bracket that now has nowhere to attach to, but it used to attach straight to here. And the passenger side bolt, it just slides right out. Once you unclip this AC line, it's just held in by a plastic snap there and a plastic snap there. Not even a plastic snap, it's a little clamp that goes around the line. Doesn't even snap to anything, it just holds on to a little foam piece. So slide that out, and then your upper control arm bolt just comes right out. Alright, as you can see, I've fully lifted the front end. I've been driving it around the last couple days like this, and just to go and do a measurement. So it was sitting at 34 inches up to the bottom of the fender, the wheel well, and now it's at about 36 3/4 or so. The rear hasn't been lifted yet, and I'm hoping that hasn't changed that much. But what is worth mentioning, so that's what it looks like, by the way, with the upper control arm and the spacer in. I love the way that upper control arm looks. So when you get in over here, what I've found out recently is that the bottom of this strut ends up breaking off, and this shock assembly ends up breaking off when you're if you're off-roading, if you just have this this little suspension lift that's stretching out the stock suspension, pushing it down with the spacer. So that is not good. I don't like that, because I do take this off-roading a decent amount, and I don't want that bottom of that strut to snap off. I've also read, when I started looking into this more, that that guys have they've hit potholes when they've just had this spacer installed, and you know, the potholes is what's broken off the bottom of that strut. So I definitely don't want that to happen. So a friend of mine actually gave me some OME. They're used. You can see they have a little bit of use on them. The OME Nitro Charger Sport. While I was trying to put it in, it was an inch longer than my factory strut that's over here that has the spacer on top. So even with the spacer, this assembly as it is was about an inch taller. So I was even putting spring clamps on it to try to clamp this spring together, the coil, and it still wasn't. I still couldn't get it to squeeze in. And so what I'm planning on doing with lifting the rear end is I'm going to lift up the body of it just enough to where the wheels are just barely starting to get off the ground, and hopefully I can get it within about that much with the wheels sitting off the ground, just a few millimeters. So that way I can loosen the rear end and let the rear end drop, the suspension, everything, let all that drop, and then I can raise the body up a couple inches, 2, 3 inches, 4 inches, so that I'll have room to put the suspension and the new coils in, and then bolt everything back in and lower it. And so I don't put stress on any of these, like the brake lines, anything bolted into the rear end. I'm going to make sure that everything, all these little 10, 12 millimeter bolts, actually they all just look 12 millimeter. So all these 12 millimeter bolts are disconnected. The track bar is going to be disconnected. All of that stuff, but I'm going to disconnect all that stuff after the rear end is lifted off the ground and my tires are up maybe about that much. Okay, so I've got the back of the FJ lifted up. I've got the front tires chalked, and as you can see, my jack stand here, I've got it sitting on a good sturdy spot of the frame. I've checked both this side and that side. This wheel I couldn't get. I mean, it's just barely touching the ground. That wheel I can see, if I lay my head on the ground, I can see a little sliver of light underneath it. So that's just what I want on that side. This side I'm not that worried about, because I do have it touching the ground a little bit. I'm gonna have to disconnect this track bar, and in order to disconnect it, I'm gonna remove this 12 millimeter bolt on this side, and the 12 millimeter bolt that should be on that side also bolted in the same spot on the track bar. So I'm gonna disconnect that. After I disconnect this, my little sway bar linkage, I'm going to disconnect that from right there, and then the stem top on the strut, disconnect that. But I'll start disconnecting the struts after the struts and the track bar after everything is disconnected from the back of the rear end. So I'm not disconnecting the drive shaft from the rear end. I don't have to worry about that. But all these brake lines that go between the tires, 12 millimeter bolts that go across, and I'm going to disconnect those. And then I have this rear track bar also. I'm not disconnecting it from right there, because it looks like once I disconnect it from there, it'll hang down and I'll just be forced to take that side out anyway. So I'm just going to loosen up that side, take that out. I might have to loosen this side to get it back in. I'm not sure. I guess we'll see. how it all lines up. But everything is pretty easy to access. The bottom of the strut's pretty easy to access on this side and that side. I don't have to remove the tires, which I'm glad about, because like I said, what I'm going to do is after this is all disconnected and the rear end is sitting on the ground with the tires, because the tires will be sitting on the ground supporting the rear end, then I will lift the whole body of the vehicle up about 3-4 inches above where it is right now, so that I can get those coils out. And then once those coils are out, I can put the new coils in as part of the lift kit, and then the new struts, and then connect everything back. Shouldn't take too long, should be pretty straightforward. So this part should be a lot simpler than the front. And I just saw this too. I'm gonna unbolt this just so that it'll be easier to lift the axle, because the idea is you want to lift the body as far up off the axle as you can, so that you can get that coil out. And also, let's figure out, talk about this. I don't know if everybody knows this little trick, but these little plastic clips, as you can see, there's not really a way to unbolt it. This tab is welded in. I've disconnected that 12 mil, and this one is welded in also. So I'm just sticking in there, prying out. Now I don't want to put stress on these lines, right? So this is all loose. Now whenever I lower the axle, I don't have to worry about any of these lines kinking, pulling, ripping, tearing. I'm gonna disconnect that from up there also, just so the brake lines have a little bit more play. And then this as well. So there's enough slack here, I shouldn't have to worry about it. I've disconnected this clip from there. Okay, now I've got everything unbolted. All the brake lines, everything's unbolted. These two miniature mounts, they sprung up. They're going to be a little bit hard. They're going to be a little bit hard to get back down into place unless I loosen those front two bolts, and then I should be able to shift them down. So I might end up doing that. Just loosen them a little bit and then tighten them back up after this is lined back up. Everything is loose with the exception of this has not come all the way out yet. I haven't pulled this out of this track bar. And my two struts are still in place. Once I loosen the struts, I'm going to lift the body of it up, take these coils out, put the new coils in, drop the body, and that's going to be, after that, it's just going to be putting everything back together and trying to line all these back up. Some of them are harder to get out than others. If you loosen up the opposite end, which I did not do, if you loosen up the opposite end, then it will be easier for you to slip these bolts back through. But so far, this is a pretty straightforward process, as long as you disconnect everything. And you can see this brake line here, everything, nothing's binding on anything. It'll shift up, it'll, you know, this will kind of turn a little bit, but if you leave this bolt in for that, then this bracket won't be able to slide all the way up because you don't have a lot of room to shift it over. Really quick, just going to talk about this. So this is the very last thing I'm loosening up. I've loosened up the bottom of the this strut already. I've got a 17mm on top of here, and when I try to loosen this, this whole shaft just spins freely, right? It doesn't have anything to do with the bottom bolt being loose, because it's still on the sleeve that this strut sits on. So I have the 17mm on it, and what I'm going to do, or what I have done, is I put my vice grips here just to hold the very top of the shaft in place, right beneath that washer, as it just clamped around, and I carefully clamped that around it. I do still want to use these if I have to put these back on. What I'm going to use is just a double wrench technique just to loosen this up. So I have my 17mm on there. Now that that's a little loose, switch to my ratchet wrench. You have this nut that comes off first, then you have a washer, the curved side down, the concave side down, the convex side up, and then you have this upper bushing, and there's a lower bushing underneath that. So, a few little teeth marks. It's not. Yeah. then once this bolt is all the way out, this just slides off. Now I don't know what the factory tires, if they get in the way of this, but these aftermarket ones, the back spacing on these rims is almost enough to where it clears everything without having to take the wheel off. So I've almost got it all the way off. I think I might have to pull this wheel off. That one I didn't have to. This one I might. Alright, now what you want to do is you want to make sure that your wheel weight is not in the way of this little shaft that the strut sits on. Guys, I actually had to pry mine off. I'll hammer it back on. I'll make sure that I save this and hammer it back on in this exact same place. Right now everything is removed from this rear, from the rear end, with the exception of the axle. So at this point I can start jacking up the body. I'm going to set my camera over there and just do a time-lapse view. But at this point I can start jacking up the body of this and lift it off of the axle. Lift it away from the axle and the rear end, and then take the rest of this stuff out. Got that lifted, and I double checked the jack stands. They are definitely sitting in the locks. I'm always a bit cautious when that happens, when I lift up a vehicle after I've disconnected stuff like that. Especially when I lift up one side and then I go to lift up the other side. One jack stand, sometimes they shift. So sometimes, like this one, you'll see like the edge of it start to tilt a little bit just because of how it's grabbing the frame. You'll see the edge of it kind of start to tilt up, something like that. But both of these are sitting flat. They're good. I'm leaving my jack under there kind of just right now, just until I have to use it on the rear end. But as you can see, I've lifted it up and this just comes off easily, right? This coil with the bump stop. Now you can see here I got the new one sitting beside the old one, and you got about 2 inches taller. Now if you're working on concrete, just be careful not to scratch these up, because you scratch them up then you will get a little bit of rust. Now what better thing to use as a camera holder than the other coil, right? Perfect. That one's in place. That's pretty easy. You want to make sure that it seats the way the old one did too. Alright, new coils are in. That side, I'm just going to bolt the strut in. And if you look, I just wanted to make sure that the seat, that the bump stop is all the way in the spot that it was supposed to be, that it used to be. And also, over here, the bottom of this coil has to line up with the way that the rear end is shaped. Right, I still have the wire holding the strut, holding it all the way in. Just going over the order that all this is supposed to be. So there's more of a brass colored washer, and then there's this like a aluminum colored one. Not aluminum colored, steel colored, gray, whatever. And this rubber grommet goes on. And then after that, this other rubber grommet goes on once this is through the hole in the body of the vehicle. Right? So then that goes on, this goes on, and then it came with this nut, a little nylon washer on the top of the nut. So it goes like that, that. Once I have this in place, this bolts it in, and this kind of where I want it, I'm going to clip this, and then it's going to push out. I'm not sure how fast, but it's not going to shoot out ridiculously hard, but it will push out because it is under pressure. So it'll push out, and I'm just going to guide it up into place and guide it up into the hole that's supposed to be in the body. Put that on, and then bolt it down. So okay, so you can see I had to use the jack to lift up the rear end. The shock by itself didn't Oh, a little bit of an issue in getting this in there. Not shock. The strut by itself wouldn't push up all the way, so I had to help it with the jack. Right now, notice that bottom shaft of this is spinning, so I'm gonna have to hold this while I tighten that top down. It's gonna be a little bit of pain getting in there just because of this. Not a lot of clearance, but what can you do, all right? And with this, you can see I'm using the jack to play with how high the axle is and how that lines up. Get about right there, almost. Go up some. A little more, right there. And that goes through. Same thing with this, just kind of pushing this through. I've already lined it up. That's similar to the way that I was lining that upper one up. Same thing with everything else. This feels like I'm arm wrestling. Looks like that's gonna line up. All I gotta do is push it down and then slide the bolt through. So that's gonna take two hands. But everything else seems to be going together easier than I thought it would. I'm not tightening these down until everything is bolted back in, and then that way, you know, I can start going through and tightening these after they've all been set in. But they're screwed in most of the way. They just have to be tightened down that last little bit. All right, now the rear lift kit is on. Everything is on and tightened up. The only thing I haven't tightened up yet are all the brake lines. I put a lot of the bolts in place by hand, and I was since that was spinning in place, the stem top on the rear strut, just wanted to make sure I put some load on it before I started tightening it up. Maybe I ought to keep that from spinning in place. But measuring the rear, so before I was at 36 inches. Now I'm at 38. Seems like it's 38 and 1/8 actually. I didn't look at it that closely before, if it was 36 and 1/8. And the front is still it's 37 and 3/4. I forget what it was a second ago when I measured it. A second ago. It was about 2 hours ago. But anyway, so this is it. This is what it looks like lifted. That's what it looks like lifted next to an S2000. That's my S2000 that I'm selling right now. But yeah, so it's pretty good. It's like a pretty good lift. It's not too tall. Also, you want to make sure that you, after you finish everything, you drive it around for 1 or 2 days. Look over everything. If you want to take your wheels off and then go through everything that you loosened up, took off, put back on, whatever. Go through everything and make sure that everything is still tight, it's still torqued down to specs. I'm hoping you used a torque wrench when you torqued everything back down. Just make sure that you go back over everything. Everything was tightened up. Everything that was loosened is tightened back up the way that it's supposed to be. So anyway, thanks for watching this. I know it was kind of a long video, but it was the full process of lifting this, and hope it was helpful, informative. Make sure you follow through to my next video on what this looks like with the Mickey Thompson 305s on it. So I'm expecting it to look pretty good. Hopefully I did the back spacing right and the rim width. I want this to stick out a little bit farther so that I can do my bushwhacker fender flares, and I'm also gonna, I have some little hood spacers that I mentioned that I'm gonna bring that that side step out a little bit, so it's gonna come out about 1 inch. But anyway, this is it now with a 2-inch rear lift and a 3-inch front lift. So it's closer to a 2 3/4 inch front lift. But man, I've got to wash this thing. Anyway, thanks for watching. Make sure you check out my other videos. I've got a bunch on this I've got a lot of videos to come, and then I've put up a few videos so far just on different random things. So make sure you check all those out, and make sure you like, subscribe, comment, and God bless you guys.